and welcome to Maps and Coffee Podcast, our special holiday edition. I'm Annalisa.
And I'm Joan. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook at Maps and Coffee Podcast. Our Twitter is Maps Coffee Pod, and our Instagram is Maps and Coffee Podcast.
And you can always email us, mapsandcoffeepodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from our listeners. And thanks so much for being a listener during this special episode. We're going to be featuring Joan and I's hometowns, actually, since, it's around Christmas time. A lot of people go back to their hometowns. I won't be trying to keep it COVID safe. I'll be staying here in Cleveland, but either way, we can travel there with you, our listeners, and kind of tell you a little bit more about our hometowns. So we couldn't decide who should go first, but Joan, we figured it out right beforehand, right?
Right. So we decided to base it on whose hometown was the oldest, and that would be mine. So we're going to start off with a city I've mentioned before, Richmond, Indiana. So I'm born and raised there, as well as like my great-grandparents. So on both sides of my family. So a lot of generations of me there. So Richmond is a city in east central Indiana, United States, bordering on Ohio. Richmond is located about 12 miles south of Hoosier Hill, which is the highest point in Indiana.
I did not know that.
Neither did I until I saw this. It is also the county seat of Wayne County, and in the 2010 census had a population of 36,812.
So yours is also bigger than mine as well. So I have a smaller hometown population.
Yeah. Okay. So Richmond is sometimes called the cradle of recorded jazz because the earliest jazz recordings and records were made at Gannett Records, which is a division of Star Piano Company. So Gannett Records was the first to record artists such as Louis Armstrong. I don't even want to try to say some of these. Bearderbeck? You have no clue. Jelly Roll Morton, Hoagie Carmichael, Lawrence Welk, and Gene Autry.
Oh, okay. I recognize a few of those names. That's cool.
Okay, yeah. That I did know. Bearderbeck. Someone is gonna annihilate me for that. The city has twice received the All-America City Award. The last one that it won was in 2009. So in 1806, the first European Americans in the area were Quaker families from North Carolina. They settled along the East Fork of the Whitewater River. This was part of a general migration in the early decades after the American Revolution. Everyone moving up. And the first permanent settlers on the present site of Richmond were named John Smith, not that one. You should have seen me when I was typing this up. I was like, wait, what? But not the one that you're thinking of. And Jeremiah Cox. They were two North Carolina Quakers who arrived in 1806. They came here by way of Quaker settlements in western Ohio, and Richmond is still home to several Quaker institutions, including Friends United Meeting, Richmond Friends School, and Earlham College, which is where my brother went to school. Ayo. So yeah, we're very familiar with Earlham. It was actually like right by the high school. So there are all these Earlham kids. We call them Earlhamites. So yeah, they're pretty cool. And it's a really, really nice school. So early, this I thought was interesting. And I did not know this beforehand. Early cinema and television pioneer Charles Francis Jenkins grew up on a farm north of Richmond where he began inventing little gadgets. And as the Richmond Telegram reported on June 6, 1894, Jenkins gathered his family, friends, and newsmen at his cousin's jewelry store in downtown Richmond and projected a filmed motion picture for the first time in front of an audience. The motion picture was a vaudeville entertainer performing a butterfly dance, which Jenkins had filmed himself. So he filed for the patent for the Phantascope projector in 1894. It was issued in March 1895, and then a modified version of the Phantascope was sold to Thomas Edison, who named it Edison's Vitascope and began projecting motion pictures in New York City vaudeville theaters.
Interesting.
I've heard some shit about Edison. I don't know if I like him too well. Have you?
I don't know. I don't know that. Well, I guess what I do know about him is, didn't like Nikola Tesla,
Yeah.
like he was the actual inventor of a lot of things, and yeah.
But Edison just had a lot of money and took a lot of things from a lot of people and got credit. So Charles Francis Jenkins, just throwing that name out there in the history book. So I just thought that was a little interesting tidbit. So Joseph E. Matty is credited with founding the country's first complete high school orchestra at Richmond, and later founded the National High School Orchestra Camp. Hoagie Carmichael recorded Stardust for the first time in Richmond. Famed trumpeter and singer Louis Armstrong, some of these people I mentioned before, first recorded at Gannett. And so there are a lot of other jazz and blues and all that stuff in Richmond. Now, this was something I knew vaguely of. I think more people probably in Richmond have a deeper understanding of that. But I definitely have heard that, and we have murals all over town about Gannett records and all of that, which is really neat. So the Richmond Art Museum has a collection of regional and American art. Many consider the most significant painting in the collection to be a self-portrait of Indiana-born William Merritt Chase. And I didn't know who that was either, but he is known as an exponent of Impressionism. So yeah, my whole thing with Richmond is I love it. Love to hate it at the same time. It's one of those places I've never really had the desire to settle down there, but I can definitely see why my family has stayed for so long. So a lot of what I tried to find was things that I had heard growing up, but didn't have like hardcore knowledge of, because you're just like, oh, I know what that is. I see it all the time, right, but I really don't understand the history of it. So that's why a lot of this is just like random fun facts about Richmond, because I'm sort of informing myself as I was looking through this. So one thing that struck me was the Madonna of the Trail Monument. I don't know, you've been to Richmond a few times because it was really close to our college, Muncie, in Muncie, Indiana. Do you remember that Madonna of the Trail statue at the park?
No, you showed it to me?
I feel like we did like a drive-by and I pointed it out to you. I know I've pointed out a few things to you here and there sprinkled around town, and one day we sort of did like almost like a Maps and Coffee style road trip a few years ago, like going over the bridge and seeing that antique shop. But this is one of the things that I definitely want to point out to you more next time we go, because we're gonna go some other time, I'm sure. But it's the Madonna of the Trail Monument. And it was dedicated at Richmond on October 28th, 1928. So it sits on the corner of Glen Miller Park, just adjacent to US 40. It is from a series of 12 identical monuments dedicated to the spirit of pioneer women in the United States. So Richmond has one of them. The monuments were commissioned by the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution.
We talk about this a lot, and how would you really want to be like the daughter of somebody who, I mean, like, yeah, the American Revolution, that's cool, but like, our history of a country is not the best, and a lot of those people were like slave owners.
I feel like in order to be a part of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution or other groups adjacent to that, you do have to come to terms with and if you're willing to stare that in the face, then have at it, have your tea party. But
they do have tea parties.
Do they really? But they're the ones that commissioned the statue, so I still think that's pretty cool. So they installed 12 of these along the National Old Trails Road, which extended from Cumberland, Maryland to Upland, California. So it just goes right through, which I think is pretty neat. This is another thing that like I vaguely remember knowing about, but I wanted to know more. So Richmond's cultural resources include 2 of Indiana's 3 Egyptian mummies. 2 of them are in Richmond.
I didn't know we had any Egyptian mummies.
Yeah. So one is held by the Wayne County Historical Museum, and the other is at the Earlham College Joseph Moore Museum, leading to the local nickname Mummy Capital of Indiana.
Huh. All right.
Another thing I did see, and I feel like I vaguely knew, or like I remember there was some like exhibit. You could go see it, but I couldn't remember these sort of weird facts, and I just love that. This is one. Richmond was once known as the lawnmower capital because it was a center for manufacturing of lawnmowers from the late 19th century through the mid 20th century. Richmond was known as the Rose City because of the many varieties once grown there by Hill's roses. The company has several sprawling complexes of greenhouses, about 34 acres, and the annual Richmond Rose Festival honored the rose industry and was a popular summer attraction. So you'll see a lot of, I know my friends, like, on Facebook are like, I'm from Rose City, they mean Richmond. We used to say our town all the time. I don't know what happened to that, but we say Rose City now. And fun story, one time in high school, I want to say it was sophomore year, we had just gotten a new principal that everyone was just kind of about. She wasn't our favorite. And a rumor went around, we are the Richmond Red Devils. That's our high school. And I mean, it's Indiana, so we're all about basketball and we're all about our sports in general. And we love being the Red Devils. Like, that's just our thing. And we heard that this principal was going to change us to the Richmond Rose Petals. Oh my God. Everyone freaked out.
I can see the thought process there. It sounds kind of similar and historically makes probably more sense. Like, and she probably was just trying to get away from that, like, devil. But, like, devil is, like, fun. It's a fun mascot.
Right. Like, I guess it was something like, the devil that we used in particular isn't like a cartoony looking devil. Like, it looks mean, but we liked that. And so it was going around. Texts were sent out. We're like, we're not dressing up as rose petals. What is we're not doing it. And they actually had to make an announcement in the middle of the day, like, we are not changing the name. I don't know if she backtracked or if it was just a rumor to begin with.
Might have just been a rumor,
but it spread like wildfire. And I don't think the residents of Richmond would have let that slide anyway, if I'm being honest. All right, so that's just a fun little thing.
All right.
Now this is another thing about the high school. So Richmond High School, we have the Richmond Art Museum, Civic Hall Performing Arts Center, and the Tiernan Center, which is where it's like all of our basketball, sports courts, volleyball, all of that. It is the 5th largest high school gym in the United States, which is the fun fact I love to tell all the time whenever I get to talk about my hometown, because it is huge. And a few of the others that are in front of us, I think like 3 of the others in that top 5 are in our conference. So I always say, if you win our conference, you're probably going to win state, because it's just these massive schools and these massive gyms. And it can get a little intimidating. And there's actually a time where IU East, which is another Indiana University East, I should say the full name, would actually play their sports at our high school gym. Wow. Because it was bigger and really, really nice. I think it was like in 1992, so the year I was born. The basketball team won state. And so then they got all this money, and then they just dumped it into getting more seats and more seats. And it's a lovely school. Great. Like I said, most schools don't have museums. Most high schools don't have like actual functioning museums in them, and a huge theater. And it is actually a really nice school. I feel like I took it for granted a little bit. Now here's something about Richmond that, again, I think a lot of people know that it happened, but especially my generation probably don't know the details. So on April 6, 1968, an explosion triggered by a natural gas leak destroyed or damaged several downtown blocks of in Richmond, in what we call now the Promenade. It killed 41 people and more than 150 were injured. Oh, wow. And it's documented in the book Death in a Sunny Street. So it was like a really, really big deal, and you can see the pictures from that time. So one of our family friends, who was actually a firefighter during that time, he was there trying to like rescue people. And from what I've heard from people that were actually there, because that wasn't that long ago, like 68 was not that long ago, they described just everyone trying to help. Like, it was chaos, but it was like, well, the firefighters are here, but so are citizens just trying to help everybody and figure out what was going on. So then about the actual gas leak itself, so it happened at like 1:45 p.m. on a Saturday in like a busy area, like the actual worst time that it ever could have happened. So it was because of a gas leak and faulty transmission lines under the Marting Arms sporting goods store. And then a second explosion occurred. And what happened was they had been storing gunpowder under the building. So everyone thought like, okay, settled, and then another explosion happens. So here's the shitty part. Gas had been smelled leaking in the area for days before the explosion, to the point that the local stores had to like open their doors to air out all the fumes. And from what I read, they actually did file a lawsuit against the gas corporation in Richmond for all of the explosions. And the gas company was found solely liable.
Oh, wow.
So that's good. So yeah, it was a pretty big deal back then. But after that day, it's like the whole city sort of came together in that moment. But, and I don't want to say the problem being, but also what was happening, Martin Luther King had been assassinated like 3 days before. So it was just, like, could you imagine? It's just like,
I would have thought like terrorist attack if that happened. Like if an explosion like that happened and then another one happened, I would have been like, oh my gosh, we're under attack.
I bet some people did. I mean, and that's the thing though, it's Richmond. It's not like Indianapolis. It's not like big city. So sometimes things happen in like the big city, and being in Richmond, you're just like, it'll be fine. But I could imagine on that day in particular, it was probably chaotic and terrifying. So, some notable people from Richmond, Indiana. Levi Coffin. He was an Underground Railroad organizer and director of a local Richmond bank. There's actually the Levi Coffin House. Everyone goes in elementary school. It's where he used to hide slaves on their way through the Underground Railroad. So you can, they fixed it all up, and you go and you take a tour and you see all the little cubby holes where they hid, and like just get a lay of the property. And so I think that's really neat. The Wright brothers, aviation pioneers.
Right, of course. I
think I've told you. One of them, I cannot remember which one, actually went to Richmond High School for a little while. Just one of them, I believe. Bo Van Pelt, professional golfer. I actually know some of his family. It's really cool. Here's some of my family that's, a little famous. Harold Jones, who is a drummer, he has performed with Tony Bennett and Count Basie. So, does Tony Bennett ring a bell to you?
Yeah. He did like that Lady Gaga song.
Yeah, and they got a, what's the award for musicians? Not a Grammy. Is it a Grammy?
Yeah, it is a Grammy.
Yeah, it is a Grammy. I wanted to make sure I didn't say Oscar. I thought about that earlier. But yeah, so my cousin won one.
Oh, wow.
Because that's who he performs with, is Tony Bennett. So really cool. Melvin Deacon Jones, who's a blues organist, also my cousin. Ayo. Here's one that I'm really excited to maybe not announce, because we've known for like a week or so now. Desmond Bain. He just got drafted to the NBA like 2 weeks ago. He's from Richmond. He went to Seton Catholic, which is just a private Catholic school in Richmond. But then he went to the TCU Frogs for a little while. And now he is going to be on the Memphis Grizzlies. So everyone keep a lookout for Desmond Bain. He was selected 30th overall. So pretty damn good, if I do say so myself. And then this one that I always like to mention, Jim Jones.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Founder of the People's Temple. So for those of you that don't immediately recognize that, I know we have some out of the country listeners. So for those of you that don't know Jim Jones right away, he's the guy that took all of his cult-like followers down to South America and had them drink poison Kool-Aid and killed all but like 5 or 6 of them. So when they say don't drink the Kool-Aid, they're talking about Jim Jones. He is from Richmond, Indiana. He lived there for a little while, and before going to Indianapolis, which is where he gained most of his following. Now, some quick things to do while you are in Richmond, which I had a lot of fun trying to compile this list because I tried to do it not looking on the internet because, like, I'm from there. I should be able to find things. No. All I did as a kid was walk around Walmart with my friends, play tag in the park, go bowl. Like, I'm not going to tell our listeners that. But, again, when you're from a place, you don't think of those other things to do. So I did end up having to look around. I was like, what can someone do there if I'm showing them for the first time? So there is Glen Miller Park, which just in general, it's a really pretty park. And you can go see that Madonna of the Trail statue. The Indiana Football Hall of Fame is in Richmond, Indiana. I also recommend seeing if the Civic Theater is playing anything because I've been to some of the plays there and they're great. You can go see Bethel AME Church, which is the church I went to growing up. It is the oldest AME church in Indiana, and it was founded in 1868, and it's gorgeous. Morrison Reeves Library, a place I frequented. Love it in there. Very historical. It's like one of those old libraries, too. You've been in there.
Yeah.
And here's another random one. Marcelin Jones' gravesite is at Earlham Cemetery. She is Jim Jones's wife. And she died during the mass suicide. So you can go see her grave.
They brought her to
Richmond?
Richmond?
She was very religious and very devout, and her family was from there. I've heard, you hear bits about her, but you really don't hear anything about her the same way you do him. So I'm not really sure how people were okay with that, except for the fact that, like, her, and her daughter that she had with Jim Jones, neither of them, like, those two were just sort of like, oh, we're here, so we're here. They weren't active, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I guess it's okay. But you can go see her gravesite. I knew off the top of my head, coffee.
I was going to ask you where to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah. You got to go to Roscoe's. Actually, some of my friends work there. They always have, it's just like a great vibe. It's a great atmosphere. It's also a bar, so you can get drinks. And during Oktoberfest, we have like a little Oktoberfest down in the promenade. They always have amazing beers. And they're just really cool. So I would always go to Roscoe's for lunch too, because they have like really good avocado bacon sandwiches. Like, oh my gosh.
That sounds amazing.
And then I would recommend going there for like lunch. In the mornings though, you got to go to the Tin Cup. It is just the quaintest little diner. You would almost think that it was like on the side of a highway. I've had a coffee. I've had toast, hash browns, eggs, and like a side of oatmeal for like $4. But it's so good. I could eat a whole loaf of their toast. I don't know how they're toasting the toast and what butter they put on that, but oh my gosh, it's usually just one lady behind the counter. There's usually some guys in the back playing cards and reading a newspaper, and all along the walls, it's Richmond history. It's really, really, really cool. And yeah, I would go there before work sometimes, and I would just have, I'm not saying it's fancy coffee. You're not going to get like a Starbucks order, but when you just like want to sit and like just have some nice like jazzy music going, and like I would write. That's where I would write a lot of my book there.
Did you take me there? And we got like smoothies or something?
No. That was you're talking about Fifth Street Diner, Fifth Street Bagel, which is also really good, actually. I really like it there too, because it always smells good in there, and they have like a little store where you can go shopping, like clothes shopping. That's what we did. That's another great place. I also recommend that. So our food is pretty prime. But yeah, I was born and raised there. My parents are there. My younger brother, basically most of my immediate family is still in Richmond. It was an interesting place to grow up. It's that small town life where like, we're bored on a Saturday. Let's go drive out in the middle of nowhere, or go sit on the lake, or get into trouble as my parents listen to this podcast episode. But I love to hate it, love to visit. Still got a lot of friends there. And like I said, you've been a few times. I feel like you've enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, I love it. I love the architecture. I love the food. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I just wish we would label our streets better. That's another thing. If you're driving, Annalisa can attest, our signage sucks.
I was just thinking more like it confuses me. I assume that if you live there, it makes more sense, but just like the quadrants and stuff. I think it makes sense to those who live there, but it's confusing for me that you have like the same name of street, just like in the different quadrant.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. It's got its quirks, but yeah, like I said, love to hate it. Yeah, so that's Richmond. That's my hometown. Yay. And we gotta do a trip there sometime.
Yeah, definitely. And to my hometown. Yeah. And I'm going with Highland, Indiana. That's where I lived for most of my life, about 14 years in there. Have you been there? I know we haven't gone together, but I didn't know if you've been.
I've been several times with our friend Lindsay, because we would go to her grandparents' house and go do different things. I think like 4 or 5 times. So I've seen some cool stuff there.
Okay. That's kind of what I figured, that you'd been there with Lindsay, but I wasn't sure. So yeah, basically the reason why, I have multiple hometowns is I was actually born in Attica, Indiana, about 2 hours away. And when my parents divorced, my dad stayed there while my mom moved back to Northwest Indiana. My parents were from Illinois, kind of that area. So she moved there. And so I might go into Attica, Indiana's history, some other podcast episode, but for now we're sticking with Highland, Indiana, which, by the way, I haven't lived there for like 10 years, so I think things have changed a little bit. I mean, I go back, obviously, but, this is the Highland, Indiana that I grew up. That's the podcast episode. Nice. And I wasn't even sure where to start, but I think like geography and history is, of course, where I usually start with any place. So Highland, Indiana is pretty close to Chicago. And it's over the state line, though, of course. It's not in Illinois. And that proximity to Chicago, I think, affects its culture because the people there really identify more with Chicago and Illinois than they do with Indiana. We watched Chicago media. We rooted for Chicago teams. We visited Chicago on field trips to the Museum of Art and the Field Museum and the zoo. We would take family trips on the South Shore Railroad. And I imagine that it's similar to the experience of people who grew up in New Jersey, like just across the border from New York City. Like they identify it with it, but they're not close enough to claim it. So, Highland is so separated from the rest of Indiana that it's actually in a different time zone. It's on Central Time, the same time as Chicago, and the rest of Indiana is on Eastern Time. For the most part, there's a little section close to Kentucky. And it used to have this weird time zone issue, actually, where part of the state would follow daylight savings time. It was kind of up to the county. And other parts of the state wouldn't follow daylight saving time. So sometimes they'd be on the same time zone, sometimes they wouldn't. And it was so confusing, actually, that the show The West Wing had an episode where they were campaigning in Indiana and they were lost and they didn't know what time it was.
Really?
That was a running joke, yeah.
I love The West Wing, and I do not remember that particular part of the show. I bet when it happened, I was excited. But yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. It made things confusing, especially for my parents, who were in different time zones, but sometimes they weren't. Until 2006, when a law was actually passed requiring all counties to use daylight saving time so that the time zones would be consistent. So it's Highland, Indiana is a suburban area, that whole area. And the town itself is kind of small with a population of about 24,000. But it's just one small town in this larger area. So the entire county of Lake County, and again, this is the most northwest that you could possibly get in the state, just south of Lake Michigan. And the statistical area of Lake County is about 500,000 people, as the area of Northwest Indiana is about 820,000, which is actually the second largest in the state after Indianapolis, which is the capital. A lot of people call it the region, or da region, as they say in our accent. And it's a shortening of the Calumet region. The two rivers in the area are the Grand Calumet and the Little Calumet, and that's where that region gets its name. There are differing viewpoints on where the word Calumet comes from. Most people say that it does come from Native Americans in the area. Some believe that it's actually like the French substitution for the Indian name for river, or some people say it just means like still waters, so something along that line.
I will say, just a slight backtrack, you do have an accent. And I pointed it out on this podcast. And a lot of that is because I remember in college, I met you and our other friend Lindsay. And they're both of them are from that area, from that region. And our other friend at the time, Caitlin. And I just, oh my gosh, you got backpack. And I was like, what are all of you saying? I'm so confused. But yeah, the accent, and I pointed it out on this podcast, so people will have to go back and listen and pick that out. That's interesting.
Oh, absolutely. I don't deny that I have an accent. It has toned down over the years. I know. I even tried to say accent without the accent, because I could tone it up and say accent, like, which is how I probably would have said it, like, straight out of high school. Mm-hmm. Honestly, when I moved to Ball State University, like Muncie, Indiana, people thought I was from maybe Minnesota, maybe even Canada. They would guess, like, totally, even Alaska. I got Alaska a little bit, too, because it's just such a weird accent.
I remember guessing, I think I guessed Chicago. But also me being from Indiana and having heard a Chicago accent before, I wasn't like, oh, that's Minnesota all the way, because I'm pretty sure by that point I had probably met one person from Minnesota, let's be real. So I think I guessed Chicago, and it made sense.
I will say it's close to a Chicago accent. I will say I think Northwest Indiana has just like a slightly different accent than Chicago, even. Just a little bit. Just a little bit different.
I've had people say I have an accent and I don't hear it. But every now and again a word will slip out, and I feel like that's y'all's fault up in the north. I don't know or maybe it's Kentucky, I don't know. But let us know if you guys hear our accent when we talk on this podcast. That would be interesting. If someone's like, oh yeah, you both are horrible.
Oh, for sure. I would be curious. I love accents. I love linguistics. I think it's all very interesting.
And then we have like the most subtle one ever. It's not like intense or harsh, which is fine, which is probably good for the nature of a podcast. But yeah, it's all really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, the Calumet River is nearby. I actually grew up close to it. And I even read on Wikipedia that it has a history of flooding. So Highland, Indiana is apparently well known for parts of it flooding, which I didn't realize was like, important enough to put on our small Wikipedia page. But I did live through a pretty big flood, to the point where so they had to like close down schools. And my brothers, to get them out of the school, they had to use like kayaks and canoes.
I was wondering if you were about to say that. Could you imagine? Okay, as a kid, it's probably equal parts scary, also a little cool, because you're getting picked up by a boat. But, oh my God, I didn't realize it flooded that bad up there.
Mm-hmm. And the house that we were living in at the time was just off of Ridge Road, which the name itself like tells you that it was on a ridge. So we were okay, but the block that we lived on sloped toward this creek, and the creek flooded. So houses just to the south of us were flooded. And yeah, it was a pretty crazy time. So we got lucky with our house, but it was one of the big floods. And they mention it on the Wikipedia page. I think it was the flood of 2008. Yeah, it was. It was the flood of 2008 that happened. So yeah, pretty crazy. So a person from the area might be called a region rat.
I wondered if you were gonna skip over.
No, of course not. So like, I don't know if it's an official mascot. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's an unofficial mascot, but it's the region rat. And I wasn't exactly sure where that term came from, but most articles I read point to actually a pejorative term for the steelworkers in the area, who were frequently called mill rats. But I think region rat has turned into something that people are very proud of. And in fact, my Twitter handle used to be region rat 219.
I remember that. I remember that one. And all of you guys were like the region rat gang. And for some reason I felt left out, even though I have no desire. Like, okay.
Yeah, and so my Twitter handle is regionrat219, and 219 is the area code for the area, which people are also very proud of, and they actually have a 219 day celebrated on February 19th as well.
Interesting. Didn't know that.
Also, it's surprising that you felt left out. I never felt like you were, but it's funny because I always felt left out of the people who were like, who could claim Chicagoland, because like one time I got in a fight with this person who like was like, Northwest Indiana isn't part of Chicagoland, and I'm like, it literally is. Like, it's part of, you know, this area, the media area of the, you know, Chicago media landscape and everything. But that was like when I first moved, and honestly I grew to just kind of accept the region as its own thing.
I wonder if that's just something that you grow. I wonder if there are people right now, like kids in middle school and high school in the region, that are like, I'm from Chicago, and they'll grow out of it too, probably.
I think it's more of just like an ease thing. You know, when you move and you're explaining where you're from, nobody knows Highland. So it's easier to just say like near Chicago, but then that leads to its own issues of like, oh, you're from Illinois. And it's like, no, I'm not. So it's hard to explain. It's like Northwest Indiana, and then people have to like either mentally think about a map and try to figure it out, or they just don't even care and they just hear Indiana. So
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when I try to explain Richmond, I'm like, I'm literally on the border of Ohio, and as I describe it, I could walk to Ohio. I could walk to the border of Ohio if I really felt like it. It's just that close, and we get a lot of Ohio perks, as I imagine you guys do. Like, so if you had gone to an Illinois school, would you have paid in-state tuition? Are you that close? Because we can do that with some Ohio schools, because it's just so stupid close that I would have, if I had gone to some of those Ohio schools, I would have paid in-state instead of out of state.
I don't think so. I did go to grad school in Illinois, and I paid out of state. And also I think Chicago has enough of a draw. I think part of it is that like places in Indiana and Ohio are trying to draw talent, whereas Chicago has absolutely no need to advertise.
That's also a very good point. Yeah.
But yeah, we had, you know, for a while, Indiana didn't sell, alcohol on Sundays, so people would go to Illinois.
We drive to Ohio. We would go to Ohio on Sundays. There's this little like shack on the highway that's literally just over the border, so we just had to get there. I didn't know you guys did that too. That's hilarious.
And people come to Indiana for the fireworks, though, because Illinois is more strict about fireworks.
Oh, see, that I didn't know.
So that's actually part of Northwest Indiana culture, that, like, when you cross the border, you see all these billboards for, like, Crazy Kaplan's, and, like, sometimes Crazy Kaplan's is, like, Halloween store, but, like, for pretty much the whole summer, it's, like, oh, biggest fireworks store, and, like, it's, like, a huge fireworks thing.
That makes sense, because in Richmond we have the equivalent of a giant barn. I mean, and
I've seen it off the highway.
Yeah, off the highway. It's right next to that giant cross, that like giant skyscraper of a cross we have, and then not too far, it's that giant barn, says fireworks right over it. That's where my dad goes to get all of his crazy stuff.
Right along the border of Illinois and Indiana as well, if you cross the border into Indiana, I don't know if they're still running this billboard advertising campaign, but you used to see billboards that would say, Illinois by higher taxes, move to Indiana.
Because they just hop right on over. That's hilarious.
Because a lot of people do commute into Chicago for work, or Illinois just in general. If you don't work like, in the steel mills, which my mom and dad both have, and like my grandparents, like my family has ties to the steel mills, of course. But yeah, if you don't, my mom is also commuted to Chicago, working for a law firm and stuff. So yeah.
You know what our billboards say?
What?
Tom Raper rent to own.
Oh yeah, the RV owner.
Yeah. Come to find out, so Lindsay's husband, Christian, randomly knew what Richmond was because there's a subreddit for the Tom Raper.
Oh my god.
Oh, I should explain. Tom,
it's the guy's last name.
Yes, it's his last name. Tom Raper, rent to own RVs. So it's just like, but they're like they've got a lot of money. Everyone knows who they are. I don't see it as a joke because I saw it all the time. But come to find out, people actually know who he is or know that those signs exist, and they're all over Richmond because that's where he's based out of. So those are our billboards that we have.
So yeah, a little bit more about the history. I was worried that this was going to be long because I just had such a hard time distilling everything that I know and everything that I learned. Like you said, like I learned a lot from researching it because we grew up here but don't always know everything. Mm-hmm. So the town was settled by pioneers from Ohio, which I enjoyed, in 1847. It expanded in the early 1880s with the development of the railroad. And while the town was expanding, Dutch settlers from neighboring Munster, Indiana, if anyone drinks Three Floyds beers, they're pretty popular, and they're from Munster. So the Dutch settlers began moving to Highland. I think of it very much as like a Dutch town. One of the main grocery stores is called Strack and Van Til's, which is like a Dutch name. But apparently only about 10% of the town is Dutch today. So even though it was settled by Dutch, that influence is not as prevalent today. There's a park on the border of Highland and Munster. And when I was in high school, President Barack Obama gave an address on Halloween in 2008. Shortly before he became president, actually. Halloween, October, it's like right before the election day.
Yeah, that's dope.
Yeah, and so I knew that, of course, because I grew up in the area and it was a big news then. I didn't realize, though, that President Coolidge actually gave the dedication address when the park was founded in 1927.
Oh, so that's probably why he went there in the first place, do you think?
I don't actually know. I think he went there... I mean, Indiana went blue in 2008, so I think it was like one last, swaying people because Northwest Indiana is pretty democratic. Like, they go blue, while the rest of the state will typically be red, except for maybe, like, Indianapolis and a few other, cities. But yeah, I think it was probably, like, one last campaign attempt, and clearly it worked because we went blue.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just beyond the park, there's Blue Top Restaurant. It's a drive-in. And Seth and I actually ate there for the first time. I'd actually never eaten there. We went there over the summer because it was like a COVID-safe experience. So like eating at a drive-in, got some burgers. Oh, man, it was great.
I don't know the last time I've been to a drive-in restaurant. We should find that somewhere on one of our episodes. Somebody email us a place that we can go from Cleveland that has like a really nice drive-in food.
All right. People kind of like in their, 60s or even 70s talk about that area and how like on a weekend night, people would like drive their cars down the strip, stop at Blue Top to hang out. Like everybody would just like be hanging out, like typical like 50s and 60s high school experience. That would be what it was. And along that strip are a lot of diners from that area. It was clearly like that was when that spot of Highland grew. And so that 50s diner vibe is kind of what Highland has like latched onto. And one of their new welcome signs when you go into downtown Highland says "Welcome to Downtown Highland" in like neon colors. It was pretty controversial when they put it up because it was like some people didn't like it, I guess. I like it. It's different. I like it.
Yeah, I don't see what's wrong with that.
Yeah, they just kind of like leaned into the 50s diner vibe.
Yeah.
I think some people criticized it because it's like, oh, what else is there to do in Highland except the past? Like nothing else here except the things long gone. But yeah, I kind of like it. In addition to its Dutch influence, it's there's also a lot of Greek immigrants who have lived there, and one of Northwest Indiana's dishes is lemon rice soup. I grew up eating those in those diners. The region is also a mix of Eastern European influences, and every year there's actually a pierogi festival to celebrate that other region's specialty. It's very good.
I just say the first time I had a pierogi was in Highland during the 4th of July, and you guys have it was like in the park, and we went, and it was like all the fireworks, but it was all these little booths, and it was almost like a fair festival at the time. Oh my God, it was so good. I'd never had a pierogi before, and Lindsay got me some, and they're delicious if you've never had one. You need to find some or make some.
All right. I bet you were like in the town, like we have like a fair, and it's like in this like this area of town that's kind of close to downtown. Yeah. We kind of my parents live kind of close to there. We used to walk. There's like a bike trail that kind of connects it to the rest of town, and
I didn't do that.
Yeah, we used to walk to this. It's not there anymore, but an ice cream shop called Sweet Tooth. And now, after Sweet Tooth has left, it's been a couple businesses, but now it is a pierogi place, I think called Dan's Pierogies. It's really good.
Oh, that sounds good. That's going on my list.
So it's close. Highland is close to Gary. Usually when I tell people I'm from there, they're either like, oh, like, Michael Jackson, or, Gary, or they know of the newest national park, Indiana Dunes National Park, which is just south of Lake Michigan. For those who don't know, the Great Lakes area of the Midwest, we live right now on Lake Erie in Cleveland, and I grew up around Lake Michigan, but that Great Lakes region, it's actually one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world, all of this grouping of lakes. And it was formed by glaciers from prehistoric times. And the sand dunes near where I grew up began to form thousands of years ago when lake levels actually dropped dramatically. One of the biggest dunes in the area is Mount Baldy, which as kids we used to like run down, and one time it swallowed my flip-flop. It was hot to hike back with only one shoe to the car, but I was actually lucky because in 2013 the dunes swallowed a 6-year-old boy. Yeah, I got away lucky, but he dropped into this hole, and they were like, oh my gosh, like it was like a 12-foot hole, and he was like, I'm scared, and they're like, we'll get you out, and then like the hole like sank into itself, and they like couldn't find him, so they had like rescuers come, and they searched for like almost 4 hours, and when they pulled him out, they actually thought he was dead, but luckily he did actually start breathing again. I know.
God, you had me on that.
Oh my God.
I was like, bruh, come on.
No, I wouldn't get that morbid with that story. I probably would have just like left it out.
Yeah. Damn. Woo. Okay, continue.
No. Very lucky, and his family has said actually that he hasn't had any like long-term issus from that. He was very, very lucky. People just called it like a miracle. They like legitimately thought he was dead. Like he was in the ambulance. Like they weren't even like resuscitating, and they like realized that he was like still breathing because they checked, and apparently he didn't have a pulse. So yeah. But yes, luckily he's okay. But what's interesting is they learned, because they thought that these dunes were just solid sand. They learned that day that the dunes are actually like moving due to kind of industrialization of the area, and like the wind hits the dunes, and it used to actually not move very far each year, but then it started moving even more. And when it moves, it buries some trees, and then the trees of course can't survive because they're covered in sand, and the wood will like rot away, and when it disappears it will leave like pockets. They had to study that. They had no idea why this boy fell into the hole, by the way. They were like, what is happening? So, and the beach was closed for like 4 years after this while they studied it. But yeah, that's what they've determined, that basically like there are air pockets in the dunes because they are
so
moving.
No one can go there anymore now, I assume.
I think that they're open again.
Oh, God.
I know.
No! Do people know that could potentially, like, is that a hazard? Did they find some way to solidify dunes? I doubt.
No, I think they just know that it's a hazard, kind of like the riptides of Lake Michigan.
Oh, hell no. Oh, my God, no.
So that is, the Indiana Dunes National Park, where everybody was really excited in the area that it was made a national park, because then people will come visit it. It used to just be a national lakeshore, so it was a protected area, but when it was made a national park, like, people want to go visit all the national parks, so that was pretty cool. So the area in general, just to summarize, like, industrial from the steel mills and other factories, but it's also this beautiful nature of Lake Michigan and the dunes. And when you're on the Indiana side of Lake Michigan, you can see the Chicago skyline along with a NIPSCO power plant, the electrical power plant. So it's kind of just like a mix. It's also, some of the cities within the region are the most diverse in Indiana, according to census data. So it's just kind of like this really interesting mix of, like, nationalities, immigrants from all over the world, and then also this mix of, like, industrial and nature. So kind of an interesting place to grow up. And, of course, staying true to our normal recap of coffee places. If you go downtown, as I mentioned, there's a pierogi restaurant. There's some other restaurants. But there's also Sip Coffee House. It's one of my favorite places to go in downtown Highland, Indiana. And you could go for a cup of coffee, or you can even do, like, a sit-down meal. There's some good food. And it's connected to this other store that sells, like, candles and, like, other kind of... just like house decorations and stuff, and it smells really good. I feel like there's so much that I didn't get to. The library is downtown. I always loved the library growing up as a kid, of course. We used to go there a lot. But maybe one day we can visit and explore even more, and then I can tell you even more about it.
I definitely agree. It's really hard doing your own hometown. I really tried to pick random little facts that I wasn't familiar with. So I didn't get to a lot of things, but I feel like I do want to save some stuff, and it will be really exciting. But I love that we've both been to each other's hometowns, so we're not completely in the dark. Like, I kind of know some of the areas you're talking about, and I've heard of the dunes. I've heard you guys talk about those before, and you've been to Richmond several times and have seen a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, we're definitely going to take trips there sometime, but this is the holiday episode, and in light of the holidays coming in a few weeks, and this being our last episode before our little break, our little holiday break, this was really nice. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
So yes, as Joan mentioned, we're going on a 3-week break. We'll come back to you January 12th of 2021. Thanks so much for listening to our first year of this podcast, or at least the first few months that we started in, mid 2020. But we've been enjoying it so far, and we're excited to come back with maybe even some, like, new ideas or some new stuff in 2021.
For sure. And we're not going to completely disappear off the grid. You'll still see us on Instagram. You'll still see us on Twitter. And definitely still hit us up in our Gmail, because we love that. And we reply to everybody that we can. So we really appreciate that. And yeah, we're going to be doing some revamping for next year. This was like a really fun thing to do mid-pandemic. I'm really glad that you decided to do it with me. So yay.
All right. Well, happy holidays. Happy
New Year.
Happy New Year. Really excited for all the things that are to come. And yeah. Wait. What's the thing that
You don't remember?
It's Joan's catchphrase.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget, all you need for an adventure is a map
and a cup of coffee.
I can't believe you forgot.
I did kind of forget.
Just a little.